If you've lived in Wisconsin long enough, you've probably been closer to ghost towns than you realize. Across the state are places where entire communities once lived, worked, and raised families before something caused them to disappear. Today, most people don't even know they were ever there. These are 13 real ghost towns in Wisconsin you've probably never heard of. Number 13. Williamsonville, Door County. If you've been to Door County, if you've made that drive up to Fish Creek or Egg Harbor in October when the leaves are turning, you've been within a few miles of where Wisconsin's worst single night happened. On October 8, 1871, a fire came through northeastern Wisconsin that remains the deadliest wildfire in American history. The forests had been tinder dry all summer. Loggers had left enormous piles of brush drying for months. A massive weather front pushed in with hurricane-force winds, and dozens of small fires merged into something that moved faster than horses could run. The town of Peshtigo, a lumber town of about 1,700 people near Green Bay, was consumed in under 2 hours. People ran to the river and stood neck-deep in freezing water while everything around them burned. That same night, embers carried across the bay into Door County, where a small settlement called Williamsonville was struck by what survivors described as a tornado made of fire. Of the town's 76 residents, 59 were gone by morning. 7 men hid in a well. 5 made it. A group of 35 took shelter in a potato field. None of them survived. Williamsonville was never rebuilt. The Peshtigo fire killed between 1,200 and 2,500 people, burned 1.2 million acres, and wiped 16 towns off the Wisconsin map. Here's what I still can't get past. It happened on the exact same night as the Great Chicago Fire. Same weather system, 250 miles apart. Chicago lost 300 people and became one of the most famous disasters in American history. Wisconsin lost up to 2,500 people, and most Americans have never heard the word Peshtigo. All that remains of Williamsonville is a small county park with a historical marker. There is a Peshtigo Fire Museum in the nearby town of Peshtigo, but Williamsonville itself has nothing. The tornado of fire came through, and the world moved on. Number 12. Voree, Walworth County. If you've driven west of Burlington on Highway 11 and noticed a sign for Mormon Road, now you'll know what it's pointing at. In 1844, a man named James Jesse Strang arrived in Wisconsin claiming a letter signed by Joseph Smith named him the Mormon Church's rightful successor. Brigham Young disagreed. Strang was excommunicated. He did not leave. He gathered followers on 200 acres in Walworth County and named the place Voree, the Garden of Peace. In 1845, he announced that ancient brass plates were buried under an oak tree and brought a newspaper reporter to watch him dig them up. The plates, he said, contained the last testament of an ancient king named Raja Manchu of Voreto. His followers believed him. Voree grew to between 300 and 2,000 residents. Strang ran a printing press, charged non-Mormons 25 cents to use his river ferry, and laid cornerstones for a stone temple that never rose above the foundation. He moved the settlement to Beaver Island in Lake Michigan, where in 1850 he was crowned king, wearing a red velvet robe from a discarded theater costume. He announced God had commanded polygamy. 2 of his own followers shot him in 1856. He was carried back to Voree, where he died without naming a successor. His followers were driven from Beaver Island. Most came back. The kingdom was over. A small Strangite congregation still meets on Mormon Road today. The man who called himself king died in the town he named the Garden of Peace. Almost nobody in Wisconsin knows this happened right here. Number 11. Sinipee, Grant County. If you've driven the Great River Road through Grant County, past the limestone bluffs and the small towns clinging to the edge of the Mississippi, there's a spot about 3 miles north of the Iowa border where a whole town disappeared in a single summer. Sinipee was founded in 1837 by investors who needed a port to ship lead ore from the driftless area. They hired a young man named John Plum and built a grand stone hotel into the base of the bluff with a natural spring under the floor. Generals Zachary Taylor and Jefferson Davis are said to have stopped there. Plum drafted a petition to Congress for a transcontinental railroad starting at Sinipee. For a year or two, it seemed possible. Then the Mississippi flooded in 1839. The water left shallow, stagnant pools across the low ground. Mosquitoes bred in those pools. Malaria swept through so fast that within weeks, whoever could travel had already gone. By 1840, the town was empty. A visitor who returned wrote, "The buildings looked brand new, every door open, not one person came out." John Plum never recovered. He spent the next 18 years trying to start over, failing each time. He died in Dubuque in 1857. His grave went unmarked for nearly 150 years, rediscovered only when a historian tracked him down in the late 20th century. In 1934, a dam covered what remained. People call it the Atlantis of the Mississippi. Number 10. Ulao, Ozaukee County. If you've taken the Lake Michigan Shore Road north from Port Washington, past the clay bluffs that drop toward the water, you've passed through what remains of Ulao. Ulao, pronounced Ulao, was a working port on Lake Michigan, founded in 1847, long wooden pier, sawmill, post office. The Great Lake Michigan steamers burned wood for fuel, and Ulao sold it to them. One piece of its history almost everyone will recognize. In 1850, a land surveyor moved his family to town, his wife, 6 children, including a 7-year-old son named Charles. They stayed 5 years, until the mother died. Then they moved back to Illinois. That boy, Charles Julius Guiteau, grew up to shoot President James A. Garfield in 1881. Guiteau spent his adult life drifting between failed careers, failed lawyer, failed preacher, failed political operative, growing convinced God had chosen him for something great. He stalked the president for months before drawing a revolver at a Washington train station. Garfield survived the initial wound but died 11 weeks later, largely from infection caused by his own doctors probing the wound with unsterilized fingers. In court, Guiteau told the jury, "The doctors killed Garfield, I just shot him." The jury took less than an hour. He was convicted and hanged in 1882. Ulao faded when the steamers switched to coal. The post office closed in 1864. 5 buildings still stand, including the Guiteau family house, empty on the bluff above Lake Michigan. There's a bar down the road called the Ghost Town Tavern. That name still fits. Number 9. Cheyenne Valley, Vernon County. If you've driven Highway 33 between Ontario and Hillsborough through the driftless ridges, there's a small park with a historical marker near Hillsborough that most people drive right past. It marks one of the most remarkable and least known communities in Wisconsin history. In the early 1850s, a free black man named Walden Stewart arrived in the valley northwest of Hillsborough. Wisconsin had just defied the Fugitive Slave Act, refusing to return escaped enslaved people to the South, and word of that defiance had traveled. People came. Over the next 2 decades, nearly 150 black settlers came to Cheyenne Valley. Some had escaped slavery, some were born free, many guided here by Wisconsin Quakers. They bought land, built farms, put down roots. A man named Thomas Shivers, born on a Tennessee plantation, eventually owned one of the largest farms in the area. What makes Cheyenne Valley unlike nearly anywhere else of that era is what didn't happen. The Norwegian, Irish, and Bohemian families already there stayed. They shared tools and labor. Their children went to the same school and church. They intermarried. One woman who grew up there was asked decades later what it was like, growing up integrated in rural Wisconsin in the 1870s. She said, "We didn't even know we were integrated. We just didn't think about color." Thomas Shivers' son, Alga, came home from World War I and built round barns across Vernon County. If you've ever passed one of those round barns on the back roads between Hillsborough and Viroqua, there's a real chance Alga Shivers built it. The younger generation left for Milwaukee and Chicago the way they left farms everywhere. The last community reunion was held in the 1940s. The valley is quiet fields now. Most people have no idea what happened there. Before we go further, if this kind of Wisconsin history matters to you, subscribe. We do this every week. Number 8. Belmont, Lafayette County. Before there was a capital on the Madison Isthmus, before Wisconsin was a state, there was a settlement in Lafayette County that was, for exactly 46 days, the capital of all of it. In 1836, President Jackson signed the bill creating the Wisconsin Territory, all of present-day Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, and parts of the Dakotas. A businessman named John Atchison convinced the newly appointed governor to hold the first session in Belmont. The government buildings were prefabricated in Pittsburgh and shipped to the frontier. Legislators arrived in late October with no heat. Some slept on the floor in their overcoats. They passed 42 laws in 46 days. Then a land speculator named James Doty, who owned land near a swampy isthmus 100 miles north, quietly traded land grants for his fellow legislators' votes. The capital moved to Madison. Belmont never recovered. The railroad missed it by 2 miles. Residents took their buildings apart and moved them down the road to be near the tracks. The original Capitol buildings became livestock barns. A women's civic group saved what was left starting in 1910. 2 buildings still stand in a Lafayette County cornfield, the Council House and Lodging House where Wisconsin's government was born, used for 46 days and left behind. Number 7. Pendarvis, Iowa County. If you've been to Mineral Point on a fall afternoon, you may have driven right past Shake Rag Street without knowing what's on it. In the 1830s and 40s, miners from Cornwall in southwestern England began arriving in Iowa County. The Helena limestone hills looked like home. They built stone cottages on Shake Rag Street, thick walls, heavy timber, small windows, built to outlast their builders. Most left in 1849 when gold was found in California. The cottages stood empty and crumbled. Then 2 men arrived and changed everything. Robert Neal and Edgar Helena, partners in life and business, came to Mineral Point during the Depression and saw what was decaying on Shake Rag Street. They bought the first cottage for $10, opened a small restaurant serving Cornish food, and used the profits to restore more. Over 35 years, they saved the cottages one by one. The Wisconsin Historical Society took over in 1971. Today, you can walk Shake Rag Street and step inside stone houses built in the 1840s by men who had never heard of Wisconsin 6 months before they arrived and were gone to California gold within a decade, right there in Mineral Point. Most Wisconsin people have driven past it their whole lives. Number 6. Dover, Iowa County. On Christmas Day, 1843, 3 men from Liverpool spent their first night in Wisconsin in an old wigwam in Iowa County. They were the advance party for the British Temperance Emigration Society, a group that recruited working-class English families, promised them land in Wisconsin, and asked one thing: no drinking, hard work, a fresh start. Within a year, nearly 700 settlers crossed the Atlantic and arrived in Dover. They built a hotel, post office, blacksmith shop, stores. They farmed the heavy Wisconsin clay. They kept their pledge. Then the Milwaukee Road chose Mezomony, 2 miles away. Dover got no depot, no stop, no future. The families dismantled their buildings board by board and moved them down the road to be near the tracks. Within a few years, Dover was nothing but its cemetery. That cemetery is still there in Iowa County, a quiet field with old trees and a stone marker. Most of the people buried there were born in England. They crossed an ocean for Wisconsin. A railroad engineer's pencil mark ended it. Number 5. Imalone, Russ County. This one is different. No catastrophe, just one of the most endearing stories in the state. Imalone is in Russ County in old logging country in northwestern Wisconsin. At its peak, it had a gas station, a bar called the Wagon Wheel, and a handful of houses. The name is the entire story. According to local legend, the town was started by a man called Snowball Anderson. One day, a traveling salesman asked the man at the counter what the town was called. The man looked around, saw nobody, and said, "I'm alone." The salesman wrote Imalone on the invoice. The state of Wisconsin officially recognized a town called Imalone. When the logging dried up and the highway moved, the town emptied. Walk through it today, and you'll find abandoned houses with furniture still inside, a fallen-down outhouse, and through the window frame of one house, a vintage television set with a shattered picture tube sitting exactly where someone left it. Imalone is about as alone as it's ever been. Number 4. Gratiot's Grove, Lafayette County. Most people driving through Lafayette County have never heard of this place. The house is still standing. You can sleep in it tonight. In 1825, brothers Henry and John Gratiot came to what is now Lafayette County. With help from a woman named Catherine Myatt, who spoke the Winnebago language and negotiated mining agreements with local tribes on their behalf, they set up 6 lead-smelting furnaces and went to work. At its peak, Gratiot's Grove produced over $600,000 worth of lead ore. 60 men lived and worked there. Henry Gratiot built a stone house around 1828. That house is now the second oldest standing structure in the entire state of Wisconsin. The ore ran out in the 1850s. The men moved on. The stone house stood through more than 150 Wisconsin winters. Today it's a working bed and breakfast. You can spend the night in the second oldest home in this state, in the middle of a Lafayette County farm field, on the ghost of an operation that helped build the whole southwestern corner of Wisconsin. Number 3. Helena, Iowa County. If you've been to Spring Green, if you've visited Taliesin or driven down to the Wisconsin River on a summer evening, Tower Hill State Park is a few miles south on Highway 23. Most people in that part of the state have driven past the sign their whole lives and never pulled in. Helena was a river town on a bend of the Wisconsin River, founded in the 1830s at a crossing where lead ore from surrounding mines needed processing. The answer was a shot tower, a tall stone structure from which workers poured molten lead from the top. As it fell, it cooled into perfect spheres for ammunition. The Helena shot tower is still standing. It is the best preserved lead shot tower in the country. A small town grew up around it. A ferry, a post office, a hotel. The railroad chose a different crossing. People followed. A dam in the early 1900s raised the Wisconsin River and flooded what remained, but the shot tower was high enough. It's still there. Walk down into the tunnel at the base, look up through the tower above you, and stand exactly where workers stood in 1839, doing a job nobody does anymore, in a town almost nobody remembers. Number 2. Chippewa City, Chippewa County. This one matters because of what it didn't leave behind. In the 1870s and 80s, the Chippewa River Valley was logging country. Fast, relentless logging that stripped entire old-growth forests within a single decade. Towns appeared wherever there was a mill and enough workers to fill a boarding house and a saloon. Chippewa City sat on the edge of what is now Chippewa Falls. At its peak, several hundred residents, mill workers, families, real community, real life. Then the timber ran out, mills closed, workers moved to Chippewa Falls or Eau Claire or followed the timber west. Buildings were stripped for salvage. By the early 1900s, Chippewa City had been swallowed by the city next door and erased entirely. No marker, no museum, no street named after it. Hundreds of lives, families with children, couples who got married, old men who watched the river from their front porches, gone without a single sign. If you live in Chippewa Falls today, you may be standing on the footprint of Chippewa City right now. Nobody ever told you. That's what logging towns were, built to be used up, and they were. Number 1. LaFarge Valley, Vernon County. Every town on this list lost something. A fire, a railroad, a disease, a mine that played out. This one lost everything to something that never arrived at all. If you've driven Highway 131 through the Kickapoo Valley in Vernon County, through that deep, winding river valley in the driftless area, you've driven through one of the most quietly devastating stories in Wisconsin history. Most people have no idea. The Kickapoo River floods. It always has. The valley is narrow and the river is famously crooked. The word Kickapoo is Algonquian for one who goes here then there. After catastrophic floods in the early 20th century, valley residents asked Washington for help. Congress authorized the Army Corps of Engineers to build a dam north of the village of LaFarge. The plan expanded, not just flood control, but a 1,780-acre recreational lake. Tourism, economic development, the future. The only problem was the 149 farming families already living there. Most did not want to sell. The government used eminent domain and took the land anyway. Farm buildings bulldozed, orchards cut down, houses demolished. 149 families gone. Construction began in 1971. The Corps built a 110-foot concrete intake tower on the valley floor and spent over $19 million. They were nearly halfway done. Then the project collapsed. Studies showed the lake would silt up within decades. A University of Wisconsin analysis found the dam wouldn't even solve the flooding it was built to fix. Budget overruns, lawsuits. In 1975, construction halted. In 1978, it was abandoned entirely. The dam was never finished. Lake LaFarge never existed. And for the next 20 years, nearly 9,000 acres of the Kickapoo Valley sat empty. Cleared, bulldozed, owned by the federal government, used for nothing. The 110-foot concrete tower stood alone in the valley, a monument to a lake that never came. When the land was finally transferred to Wisconsin and the Ho-Chunk Nation in 2000, residents were asked what to do with the tower. They voted 75% to leave it standing. As a reminder, today at the Kickapoo Valley Reserve Visitor Center, the names of all 149 displaced families are etched permanently into the brickwork outside. Most people stop to look at them without knowing what they mean. Now you know. If your family is from Wisconsin, drop a comment and tell me where they're from. The county, the town, the road. I read every one. And if you know a place in your corner of the state that the rest of Wisconsin has forgotten, tell me that too. Subscribe if this kind of history matters to you. We come back to it every week.